You are Locked On Braves POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day.
And hello and welcome into the Braves POSTCAST, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta. Grant McAuley, Jake Mastroianni with you after a frustrating day, I think, for the Atlanta Braves. It didn't start off well, and it didn't end well. In the end, as the Braves came up a couple of runs short despite a push in the ninth inning as they fall 8-6 to the Chicago Cubs, and the series is evened up at a game apiece as a result. We'll talk all about the day of Bryce Elder, the frustrations, I think, of the Atlanta offense throughout the game, a couple of opportunities that they had, and, of course, we'll get you set up for the rubber match, the finale that comes your way on Sunday. Before we do all that, though, I want to make sure you subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta here on YouTube. Click the bell to get notified every time we drop a new episode. Go ahead, leave us a comment, click that like button. We appreciate that. And subscribe to Locked On Braves wherever you get your podcast. Jake, this was one of those games that just felt like kind of one of those days for the Braves. It was almost, but not quite. And then, of course, that first inning, I feel like kind of set the tone for Bryce Elder. Couple of walks, a misplay, couple of home runs, and before you know it, the Braves got down early, and that's not something we're used to seeing. Typically, it's the other way around.
Yeah, we're not. I mean, shoe was on the other foot in this one for sure. We see how difficult it is for teams to fall behind so quickly in the first inning and then try to come back. But this offense, they have the ability to do it, and they gave themselves some opportunities to do so.
Yeah, it just changes the whole tone and tenor of the game, and it clearly is one of the keys to success for the Braves. But as you mentioned, it was the Cubs that used those keys to success early on and grabbed a big lead against Bryce Elder. Let's talk about game number 108 of the season for Atlanta. Braves now 70-38. 6 runs, 10 hits, an error. They left 9 men on base, though. That came back to hurt them. Cubs 57-54, evening up the series with 8 runs, 5 of those in the first inning against Bryce Elder. 10 hits, no errors, and 6 men left aboard. Michael Fulmer picks up the win in relief. He's 3-5. Elder takes a loss, drops to 0-3. We'll talk a little bit more about him in a moment. No save in a game that lasted 3 hours and 10 minutes. It was a rainy, misty, kind of gross day as well. Not sure that was a whole lot of fun for the Braves, but a sellout crowd at Wrigley Field of over 40,000. In fact, 40,201 were on hand to see it. Let's talk a little bit about Bryce Elder, Jake, because I know we've seen at times the best of Bryce Elder. And over the past month, I feel like we've seen kind of the worst of Bryce Elder. And, I think it's fair to look at him and his numbers and some of the things that go beyond that and the metrics and the StatCast data and say, well, maybe he overperformed a little bit early on. But I feel like, and I've said this before, you're never as good as you are on your best day. You're never as bad as you are on your worst day. For Bryce Elder, I feel like the truth is somewhere in between. But the first inning was kind of a microcosm of not having to command. I felt like the strike zone was kind of all over the place during the day. But even if you put that aside, he walks a couple of batters, a play's not made behind him, and then the long ball bites him. It was just really not a great start for him. And I mean, start from the get-go, the very first inning.
This was tough. Look, I've said all along he's not going to be a sub-3 ERA pitcher as he was for most of the first half of the season, but I still think he's a very good pitcher and very serviceable. We've said it before. The margin of error is so thin with a guy like him. He has to live on the edges. He has to get those borderline calls. It's similar to what we saw with Hendricks yesterday, a guy who has really good pinpoint control. He's got to live on those edges, but if he comes over the middle of the plate, he can get hit very hard. And that's what we saw in that first inning. Cubs did a great job. They were very patient against him. Had a couple of calls in that first at bat that if it was yesterday, he probably would have struck out the batter, but it's not. And that wasn't the strike zone today, and they didn't go his way. You walk a couple of batters, and then you do have to come into the plate and throw some strikes, and he gets hit. His stuff just isn't that dominating where he's going to get those swings and misses, can get himself out of a jam like that. Right. So it's a combination of a lot of things there. Falling behind early, strike zone being pretty tight is what it is. And then the air obviously played into that as well. The wet conditions. I'm sure it wasn't, easy for him to get a grip on the baseball. A lot of that excuses, but I do think they are legitimate. I'm not ready to just trash Bryce Elder because of the way that first inning went, where, nothing really went his way in that one. So again, he's not as good as you said as he was probably in the first half. I don't think he's as bad as what we've seen in 3 of the last 5 starts, but I still think he is a really good starter. And again, credit to him, even after that, still was able to work into the 5th inning too.
Yeah, and Bryce Elder, he's been a great story this year. I think that's worth pointing out. I mean, the Braves needed somebody to come in and just stabilize the rotation, but you and I both know, and anybody that's kind of taken an honest look at what the season is for Bryce Elder and for the Braves, the expectations were that he compete for the 5th starter's job this year. What he gave you in the first half was at a time that you needed it most, and now it's kind of a time where he's got to figure a few things out. I think make some adjustments, mechanical or otherwise, maybe sequencing, change a few things up about the way that he's attacking some hitters. And of course, you got to be around the strike zone enough to get the calls. That's certainly a deal for that. But now as you do start to get Max Fried back, as you hope to have Kyle Wright back at some point, I mean, you're really not looking at Bryce Elder to carry your rotation maybe the way he was over the first 3 months. So maybe it's just guarding the expectations a little bit more so. I know there was a lot of talk about, what this means for the postseason rotation. Jake, I don't know how you feel about it. I don't feel like it means very much, because if you are lining things up for the postseason, I think that while the first 3 months would certainly be a good audition for Bryce Elder, none of that stuff has been decided. And you knew that Max Fried, when and if healthy, and now he is, was going to be a factor in how the Braves were looking at down the stretch, and of course how they're looking in October.
Hey, I've said all along, I mean, in the postseason right now, we're talking it's Fried, Strider, however you want to line them up. And then I still have Charlie Morton. I know a lot of people kind of frustrated with his ups and downs, but he's still my third starter. And then it just depends on how things end with Kyle Wright coming back and Bryce Elder. Look, if you got to use Bryce Elder as your fourth starter in the postseason, I think you could do worse. But again, as you mentioned, I don't think he's somebody that you're going to have to lean on, or somebody that you should be having to lean on at the top of your rotation. What he did at the beginning of the year was fantastic, but again, just not that dominant type stuff. You talk about you mentioned, the sequencing and stuff. Wish you would have gone to that slider a little bit more. It's been his best pitch all year, 7 whiffs on 12 swings against it in this game. So that's the only thing maybe I would have changed up a little bit. But again, I think you're spot on. It's not somebody who you still would expect to be at the top of your postseason rotation.
No, it's not. But that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a role to play. So I'm kind of with you. I'm not ready to just, throw Bryce Elder out with yesterday's newspaper. That's just really not the way that works, and not the position that the Braves are in. And if anything, and I know that there was a lot of clamoring about maybe what was available at the trade deadline, what wasn't, what kind of upgrades. I didn't really see a realistic fit that went somewhere else that the Braves should have definitely been all in in terms of, emptying out the farm to get. You're not getting Verlander. You're not getting Scherzer from the Mets. That was never going to happen. Lucas Giolito hasn't been great for the Angels, so I don't know that that's necessarily going to make you feel better losing with the new pitcher than losing with the old pitcher. But it's hindsight number one, and then a lot of it's just kind of fantasy number two, because you never know how it would have played out. But I feel like the Braves, they just kind of went with what they knew, and what they knew was that they had enough starters right here, right now, to bring back in a guy like Max Fried and feel really good about how the rotation was going to line up, and then still have Kyle Wright on the back end of this season working his way back as well. But I think we've talked enough about all of those kind of things. It was not a good day for Bryce Elder. He has struggled lately. There it is. It's on the record. We all know it. We all saw it. Can he come back, and can he give the Braves more contributions down the stretch? Jake, I believe he's capable of doing that, and I think that he will do that, because you're going to have the highs and lows of the season and the highs and lows of a career, especially for a young pitcher who's still trying to establish himself at the major league level. He had a good run to close out 22. He carried it over into 2023, but baseball is a constant game of adjustments, and it's hard to get major league hitters out and do it consistently time after time after time every fifth day.
And I think if most people would have been realistic with Bryce Elder and what his role ultimately would be with the Braves if he reached his ceiling, I think most people would have said it's a fourth or fifth starter, and that's okay. But what we saw in the first half, as you mentioned with expectations, I think that kind of raised the expectation for him. But you look back now at who Bryce Elder is, who he could be, and if he is just a fourth or fifth starter, that's really good when you look at what he could give you. So again, I think you mentioned the word expectations earlier. I think that's spot on. I think the Braves maybe have to take a step back with some of those expectations with where Bryce Elder is in this starting rotation for the Braves.
Yeah, and again, it's all part of a bigger puzzle, a mosaic, if you will. Let's put all of that over to the side. Let's talk a little bit about the Braves offense, which, as we talked about earlier, was kind of behind the 8 ball with the 5 runs scored in that first inning, the couple of walks, the Olsen misplay. I mean, I know in ideally he wanted to, I think, make a play before he really got in front of that ball, and that ended up with a couple of unearned runs. Dansby Swanson deposited a home run into left center field bleachers, his first homer against the Braves, and then Jeimer Candelario also went deep in that first inning. So for Elder and for the Braves, they found themselves down very early. They tried to kind of work their way back into this, Jake, and I thought Elder did a good job of limiting the damage to pitch into the 5th inning. 4 1/3, 7 runs, though, ultimately charged to him. Of the 8 scored by the Cubs, 5 of them earned, 7 hits, 3 walks, 3 strikeouts, to 2 homers, as I mentioned. It was really a grinded out kind of day for him, and clearly it was a rough start. But the Braves offense, they had some opportunities. Ronald Acuna Jr., another big day, 3 for 5. He was on base a bunch of times. The stolen base, his 52nd of the year. He knocked in a run. Kind of some bad luck. I mean, Acuna was trying to get to second base. In hindsight, maybe should have slid on a little bleeder that dropped in for Ozzie Albies, but a forced play at second. It just felt like when the Cubs had a hit like that, it went somewhere and rolled for a minute. When the Braves had something in play like that, it just went to somebody and a play was made. And then ultimately, I feel like kind of the biggest opportunity the Braves had was in the top of the 6th inning. They scored a couple of runs. They loaded the bases up. It looked like it could be maybe the turning point of the game. Austin Riley's strikeout there really seemed like it kind of took the wind out of the sails for the Braves offense.
It did, but you look at for me, I go back to the line drive by Michael Harris, and you talk about the little bleeders and everything that was going, everything seemed to be going the way for the Cubs, not trying to make excuses, but even in the first inning, Matt Olson with 2 outs lines the ball right to the outfielder, could have scored a run there. And then, I go to that at bat in that 6th inning, Michael Harris absolutely hits a laser, goes right to the left fielder. You are able to get a run there, but it just a couple of things go the Braves' way in this game. It could be very different. And look, they didn't play well. You mentioned the base running mistake by Ronald, big base running mistake by Eddie Rosario in this one. The error we already talked about with Matt Olson. I mean, look, they lost this game because they didn't play as well as they could have. But again, it's just a couple of things here or there. Some balls drop in or balls are hit to 5 feet to the left of a fielder, and I think it's a different ball game. And I think the Braves could have easily won this, which again to me just speaks to how good this team is, that they can make those mistakes, fall behind 5-0, and still have a shot to win a game like this.
Yeah, I do think that speaks to the overall, quality of the Braves, particularly the lineup. I mean, they still ended up scoring 6 runs. Matt Olson comes off the decks with his 38th home run of the year. That leads the National League, came in the 9th inning, and it got the Braves within a couple of runs. But as you just kind of laid out, there were a handful of mistakes. Olson's own error that led to a couple of unearned runs in the first inning. You can obviously, look at Bryce Elder and say, hey, those back-to-back walks doesn't help to open a game that way. And you would be right about that. But I do feel like the Braves, they continue to fight. And I think that's kind of who they are and what they are and why they are who they are, if all of that makes any sense. But it was just one of those days where it did feel like you got to credit the Cubs because this baseball. Sometimes you get some breaks and sometimes you don't. And sometimes you just flat out hit the other guys and you score the most runs and you win a baseball game. And I think the Cubs did a pretty good job of that on this day to even up this series. I mentioned Ronald Acuna Jr. with his 3 hits. He continues to push that batting average now up over 340. I don't know that he's going to win the batting title because Luis Arraez still has a pretty good hold on that, but it is getting pretty interesting to see Ronald push it above 340 this late into the year. Just another part of his big season. And again, his 52nd stolen base. Ozzie Albies homered in this game. That's his 25th of the year. Braves now with 4 hitters, Jake, with 25 or more home runs. It's the first week of August for those of you scoring at home. I don't have to look at yesterday's box score. I can tell you right now, that's pretty good, and nobody else is doing it. Olson's got 38, Riley with 26, Acuna and Albies each with 25 home runs. It just speaks to, look at those guys. You line them up pretty much 1 through 4 in the Braves order. I feel like it's out-homered a few teams in Major League Baseball. That's a stat I might dig into.
Yeah, I thought I saw somebody tweet that out, that Acuna, Riley, and Olson have out-homered a couple of teams this year. So, yeah, I mean, what they're doing, the damage that they have, I mean, it's truly incredible. We talked about it top to bottom in this lineup, just what they're doing. We talked about d'Arnaud when he hits his next home run.
Yep.
They'll have 10 players with double-digit home runs this year. So, I mean, it is a powerful lineup. It's why you can never count them out of a game like this, even when they give up 5 runs in the first inning. But it just felt like in this one, they kept chipping away, 1 run here, 1 run there. They couldn't quite get that big, crooked number on the board, really, to get themselves back into this one.
Yeah, so as I look at this now, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Olson, Riley, Acuna, and Albies, you can double-check my math if you want to, have 113 home runs. That's more than the Rockies, Athletics, Pirates, Royals, Marlins, Tigers, Nationals, and the Guardians. So pretty wild to see something like that just this late into the season. It's just truly just kind of a testament to the kind of power the Braves lineup has. Not quite enough power, though, to win this one against the Cubs as they do fall by that 8-6 score. We'll talk a little bit about tomorrow's game in a moment, but we don't want to take a look at the standings, of course, Jake. The Phillies and Royals in action later on Saturday night. The Marlins and the Rangers also battling it out on Saturday afternoon. Those games not final, of course. Braves sitting on a 12.5 game lead in the NL East standings because we always want to take a look at it, and it kind of lets you know that Atlanta can continue to grind out these kind of games and these kind of series. And if they do pick up that win on Sunday, they just kind of keep ripping those days off the calendar. And eventually, and as we all know, it's some simple math where the clubs that are chasing them are really not going to have a chance in the East. And I know for the Phillies and the Marlins, that doesn't end their postseason hopes, of course. They're trying to get in those wild card spots, and both of those teams have a really good chance of that.
You talk about we're getting late into the season here, and I look at your graphic, 70 and 38. The Braves still have a 3 at the front of their loss column. That to me is just truly incredible and speaks to the level of this team and where they are. But again, the work that they've done this year has put them in a good spot. It's allowed them to get guys healthy, to give them the time to get healthy. So now, again, you're just hoping you can play your best baseball down the stretch, stay healthy, and get hot at the right time.
Absolutely. And get all those pieces back and in the right places. And that brings us to today's sponsor of the Braves Postcast is eBay Motors, who remind you a championship team is about each player being the perfect fit. It's the same with your vehicle. So for parts that fit, head to eBay Motors and look for that green check. Stay in the game with eBay Guaranteed Fit. ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only and exclusions apply. Finale of this series comes your way on Sunday. The Braves will send the veteran Charlie Morton to the mound. He's 10-9, 3.62 ERA. Ups and downs for Charlie of late. Left-hander Justin Steele, very good pitcher for the Cubs. I would argue for their best pitcher, obviously, with Marcus Stroman, I think, being the other man carrying that mantle. But 12-3 at 265, an outstanding day for him, outstanding year for him. Hopefully not an outstanding day, but we'll see how it all lines up. But I think first and foremost, you need a good start out of Charlie Morton so that the Braves bats can have a little bit of time to get going, because Justin Steele could be a tough ride.
He could be. It is a left-handed pitcher, which the Braves haven't seen much of lately, but they typically do hit pretty well when they see one. So hopefully that plays into the Braves' favor in this one. But I think you're right. The bigger thing here is Charlie Morton, getting him back on track, getting that consistency. Because like I said earlier, to me, he's still the third man in a postseason rotation, but I need to see him find that consistency more like we're used to seeing from Charlie Morton.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see that. Nice to see him miss some bats, get the Braves deeper into the game, and, of course, allow the offense to do its thing. And we'll see if they're able to do that. Felt like we're facing nothing but left-handed starters the first 3-4 weeks of the season, but it has been a while, I feel like, since they faced one, especially one as good as Justin Steele. Again, Charlie Morton, the righty for the Braves, 10-9, 3.62 the ERA. Justin Steele, 12-3 with a 265. He's the lefty on the mound for the Cubs. First pitch of 2:20 p.m. Eastern time at Wrigley Field on Sunday to wrap up this 3-game weekend series. That'll wrap things up here on the Braves Postcast. As always, we invite you to subscribe to Locked On Sports Atlanta. Make sure that you get notified every time we drop a new episode. All you have to do is click that little bell there. Make sure while you're here, you can leave us a comment. You can give us your thoughts on the game and the Braves postseason rotation, because apparently we were deciding that this week. And you can also leave a like, share it with a friend. We really do appreciate all that. We do love talking Braves baseball. That's why we try to do it as much as we can here on the show, which is part of Locked On Braves. So make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts, as Jake has all kinds of great stuff for you all season long. Once again, the Braves come up on the wrong side of an 8-6 score at Wrigley Field. They'll look to take 2 out of 3 from the Cubs, though, on Sunday. For Jake Mastroianni, I'm Grant McAuley. We'll catch you next time. And until then, so long, everyone.